At the back of your tongue, there is still the taste of old Sunday school pictures. Green leaves, bright fruit, a gate, a distant garden. And yet, the first hard problem with it is this. Revelation gives you one tree standing on both sides of a river at the same time, which is a shape no orchard on earth has ever produced. So slow down with it for a minute. You are told this is simple, but the text is not simple at all. One tree, two sides, one river, 12 fruits, healing leaves. Then Genesis adds a second disturbance. The man has become like one of us. One of us. That is a strange sentence to glide past in a tradition that insists on strict singularity. And then comes the third question, the one hardly anyone asks out loud. Why does anatomy preserve a Latin name inside the human head that means tree of life? Three questions, one symbol. And the old garden picture starts to wobble. This is where the puzzle gets interesting. Because once a sacred image behaves like a riddle, you stop reading it like landscape and start reading it like structure. If the thing in Revelation is bilateral, central, branching, and tied to healing, then maybe the writer is reaching for a form you recognize only when you stop looking for bark and roots. If Genesis speaks of access, likeness, and being barred, maybe the issue is not botany at all, but a human state, something available, then obscured. And that is why the name matters. Naming is evidence. In Old Anatomical Latin, arbor vitae means tree of life, and that name was given to the branching white pattern inside the cerebellum, the hidden cerebellum at the base of every brain. Not in one saint, not in one prophet, in everybody. Yours too. In the next step, the puzzle gets sharper, because a tree in the head is startling enough, but the count of its fruits is where the whole reading starts to lock into place. If this kind of deep dive is your thing, you can like and follow along for the next piece. That count is where the picture stops feeling decorative and starts feeling engineered. If a sacred text gives you one central form and then assigns it 12 distinct yieldings, you should at least ask whether the body contains a set of 12 branches coming off the same interior source. It does. At the underside of the brain, close to that branching pattern already named arbor vitae, there is the brainstem. From there emerge 12 paired nerves, each with its own job, each carrying a different slice of your living experience. One handles smell, one handles sight. Several move the eyes with absurd precision, the tiny wet shifts you make without noticing when you scan a page or catch a face in the corner of the room. Another carries sensation from the jaw and cheek. Another shapes expression. One reaches into hearing and balance, that faint inner tilt you feel when you stand up too fast and the room seems to move half an inch. Now listen to the wording in Revelation again with that anatomy in the background. 12 fruits, each in its season. The old reading hears produce. This one hears function, distinct outputs, repeating cycles. Monthly language in ancient writing often marks order and recurrence, not supermarket variety. And suddenly, the image gets stranger, in a good way. You are looking at a central branching system with 12 differentiated yieldings, all tied to perception, motion, swallowing, facial life, the body's contact with the world. The Tree of Life starts reading less like scenery and more like a coded diagram hiding in plain sight. And there is another layer here that people miss because the numbers alone are so distracting. Those 12 cranial nerves do not all stay in the skull like wires tucked behind a wall. One of them leaves its mark much farther down. It drops through the throat, touches the chest, reaches toward the lungs, and keeps going toward the gut. Its Latin name means wandering. If the fruits are functions, and one branch wanders through the organs that calm or disturb your whole state, then the next phrase in the verse stops being poetic wallpaper. The leaves, it says, are for healing. And that is where this turns from puzzle into something uncomfortably close to your own body. That healing line starts to sound less ornamental once you follow the wandering vagus out of the skull and into the body it serves. This branch does something unusual. It does not stay near the face or the eyes. It drops past the throat, threads through the chest, brushes the rhythm of the heart, influences the lungs, and keeps moving toward the stomach and gut. If you have ever felt your breath shorten under pressure, or your belly tighten before your thoughts even catch up, you have already felt the territory this nerve watches over. Its name matters for the same reason the old Latin name mattered. Vagus means wandering. That is not a preacher's flourish. It is a description. The nerve travels widely, and its reach is tied to the body's ability to settle, digest, recover, and come back from overload. When doctors stimulate it in controlled ways, the effect is serious enough that approved devices are used in treatment for epilepsy and depression. Sit with that for a second. A branch associated with regulation and repair, moving through the organs most people feel stress in first, attached to a scriptural image whose leaves are said to heal. Now the picture sharpens. You have a central form in the head, distinct branches, 12 major outputs, and one wandering line with a documented role in restoring balance. So when Revelation speaks of leaves for healing, you are no longer stuck imagining decorative foliage. You can hear the language differently. Smaller offshoots, finer spread, influence reaching outward from the core into the living provinces of the body. The old image begins to behave like an internal map, and the tree of life stops feeling remote. It gets close enough to touch, close enough to breathe with. But one feature of the vision is still waiting there like a loose wire. The tree stands on both sides of a river. If the branching structure and the healing leaves can be read in the body, then that river cannot be ignored. Something flows beside this form, around it, through its whole domain. And once you look for that channel, the last impossible detail in the puzzle starts to move. That channel is easier to miss because you cannot see it the way you see bark, water, or leaves in a painting. You feel its effects in pressure, in pulse, in the strange clarity or fog that can settle over your head. The ancient writer says tree and river in the same breath because the image demands a living flow beside a branching form. Once you move the scene inward, that detail stops looking impossible and starts looking precise. Inside the skull and along the spinal passage, the nervous system is not packed dry. It is bathed, cushioned, surrounded by fluid. That matters. A branching structure at the base of the brain does not sit in isolation like a museum object under glass. It exists in a wet, protected environment, a whole internal corridor of circulation. So when Revelation places the form by a river, the body offers a setting that finally fits the description. One tree, two sides of a channel, because the nervous system is arranged around a central flow, not planted in dirt. And notice how the language changes once that clicks. The old reading forces you to picture a landscape that refuses to behave. The inward reading gives you a structure, a channel, branches, outputs, and healing extensions, all belonging to one domain. Even the location of the arbor vitae helps here. It is tucked deep in that hidden cerebellum region where balance and coordination are managed with silent accuracy. A place of constant regulation, washed by fluid, connected downward through the spinal root and outward through the cranial branches. The image gets tighter the longer you stay with it. Then Genesis comes back into focus in a new way. The man has become like one of us. That line is not about someone sneaking produce from a guarded grove. It sounds like altered condition, a change in awareness, a shift in state, some kind of access with consequences. And the barring from the tree starts to sound less like fencing off property and more like separation from an inner capacity. If that is true, then the next question is uncomfortable. If this form is already in you, if the channel is already there, if the branches are already active every waking hour, what does it mean to be cut off from something you physically carry? That question matters because being cut off from an inner capacity is a very different kind of exile. It means the barrier is not miles of desert, locked gates, or some vanished piece of sacred geography. It means a human being can carry the form and still live at a distance from its deeper use. And once you hear Genesis that way, another detail starts to glow. Ancient cultures kept drawing this same upward pattern over and over again, as if they were circling one interior fact from different directions. You see it in old temple art, in diagrams, in pillar symbols, in vertical emblems that rise through the body. Different traditions gave it different names, but the grammar keeps repeating. A central axis, branching or paired extensions, a link between life, awareness, and descent. That should make you pause. When a symbol survives across languages and centuries, you are no longer dealing with one stray metaphor that got out of hand. You are looking at a pattern human beings kept recognizing, even when they did not share a scripture, a priesthood, or a common map of the world. Now, that does not mean every tradition knew neuroanatomy in modern terms. It means they may have been observing the same human reality through ritual, meditation, sensation, and symbol. The body was there for all of them. Breath was there for all of them. Inner stillness was there for all of them. So the recurring axis, the recurring life tree, the recurring channel beside it, those begin to look less like borrowed ornament and more like repeated witness. And that changes the emotional weight of the tree of life. It is no longer a private property of one religion, fenced off in one story. It starts to look biological, experiential, close to the skin. A thing different civilizations kept sketching because it could be felt before it could be named with scalpels and Latin. The old scriptural image, the branching structure in the skull, the paired nerves, the healing reach through the organs, they stop sitting in separate boxes. But there is still one stubborn objection left on the table. You can say the pattern is impressive. You can say the names are suggestive. You can even say the river finally makes sense. A skeptic can still ask one fair question. If this is more than a clever reading, how would anyone ever test it in their own body? That is the right objection, and it forces the whole idea out of theory and into sensation. If this inner pattern is real in any meaningful way, it should show itself where the body changes state. Not in a stained glass window, not in a diagram alone, but in the throat, the breath, the chest, the softening or tightening that happens before you put words on it. Start with the branch we already followed downward. The wandering vagus is part of the route by which the body shifts between alarm and repair. You can feel the difference. In one state, your jaw stays set. The pulse feels sharp in the neck. Your breathing rides high and thin, and the stomach can sit there like a clenched fist. In the other, the exhale grows longer, the face loosens, the belly warms, and the whole frame seems to drop half an inch into the chair. Same body, different government. If the tree of life has anything to do with human access, this is the sort of threshold you would expect to matter. And now, Genesis sounds stranger than before. The man has become like one of us. That is language of condition, of crossing, of altered participation. Then comes the barring. So ask yourself what barring would look like in an inward reading. It would look like noise, constant stimulation, attention scattered across every flashing thing, breath cut short, senses always pulled outward by the 12 cranial nerves into the bright, loud, demanding surface of the world. The form is still there, but access is fractured. This is why stillness keeps showing up in sacred language with such stubborn force. Be still and know. That line lands differently once the body is part of the reading. Stillness is no longer a vague moral instruction. It begins to sound procedural, a way of changing traffic in the system, a way of reducing sensory load so the inner arrangement can be felt instead of merely discussed. But if stillness is the key, then one old image in Genesis still needs to be accounted for: the turning fire that guards the way. That image sounds dramatic until you remember what actually moves through a nervous system. Every thought, every blink, every swallow, every racing jolt in the chest travels by electrical signaling. It is not hard to see why older language reached for fire when trying to describe what animates the body from within. A turning blaze guarding the way begins to sound less like fantasy and more like an ancient attempt to picture active current. Think of how the body feels under strain. There is heat in the face, sharpness behind the eyes, a hum in the jaw, a restless charge in the limbs. The same network that gives access also overwhelms when it is overdriven. That is the subtlety here. The gate is not merely outside you. The guard may be the intensity of the system itself. The very circuitry that makes experience possible can keep you locked at the surface, flooded by sensation, unable to settle deeply enough to sense the inner pattern. In that reading, the way is guarded because the path runs through living current. This also helps explain why so many people can hear the theory and still miss the thing it points to. The body is noisy. The 12 cranial nerves are always busy, pulling in light, sound, motion, taste, pressure, orientation. The mind rides that traffic all day long, so it can remain present while attention is captured elsewhere. You do not lose the form. You lose the quiet needed to notice its order. The old text compresses that entire problem into a fierce image at the threshold. And once you read it this way, the story starts behaving like instruction. Genesis gives the problem. Revelation gives the completed picture. Anatomy supplies the names. Physiology supplies the mechanism. The pieces stop arguing with each other and begin to line up, one after another, with an eerie kind of calm. You can almost feel the argument becoming tactile: throat, breath, pulse, spine. Which brings you to the part most people skip because it sounds too simple to matter. If access depends on changing the body's state, then the test is going to be plain, quiet, and physical. No spectacle, no special object, just a posture, a breath pattern, and one place in the body where attention has to be set. That place in the body matters more than most people realize. If you trace your fingers to the point where the skull meets the neck, you are near the region that has been sitting underneath this whole discussion from the start. Bone, muscle, warmth, the faint pull of posture. Beneath that, the hidden cerebellum with its branching form, and below that, the route by which signals pass downward and outward. The old image stops being an idea floating above your life. It acquires a location. And once a symbol has a location, practice becomes possible. You do not need to force belief into it. You test what happens when attention is placed there and the body is allowed to downshift. Sit upright. Let the shoulders fall. Let the tongue stop pressing against the roof of the mouth. Breathe in quietly. Then, let the exhale run a little longer than feels automatic. Nothing dramatic, just enough that the chest softens and the belly stops bracing. This is the kind of small shift that gives the wandering vagus room to do what it is built to do. You may notice something almost boring at first. The room sounds sharper, a refrigerator hum, a floorboard settling, air moving through a vent. Then the opposite can happen. Those outer signals lose their grip, and the inside of the body grows more obvious. Pulse in the throat, a loosening behind the eyes, heat leaving the face. That is important because in this reading, it is not accessed by imagination alone. It is approached by reduced noise. The 12 cranial nerves keep feeding the surface world into awareness, and stillness changes how hard that traffic dominates the field. This is why the old promise about eating from it has to be reconsidered. If the branches correspond to living functions, then feeding from it would mean receiving from the system directly. Clarity, regulation, steadiness, a body no longer yanked around by every alarm bell it can ring. And once you hear eat that way, revelation does something unsettling. The verse no longer sounds like a postcard from the end of history. It starts sounding like instructions disguised as prophecy. That shift from prophecy to instruction changes the emotional temperature of the whole subject. It means the text is no longer only telling you what will be revealed someday. It may be describing what becomes visible when the body is quiet enough, steady enough, regulated enough to perceive its own inner order. The same words stay on the page, but their function changes. They stop pointing far away and start pointing inward. Go back to Revelation with that in mind. One tree, set with a river, bearing 12 differentiated yieldings with healing spread through its finer extensions. Then lay that beside what the body already gave you, a branching form near the base of the brain, a flowing internal environment, 12 cranial nerves, and one branch with unusual reach into the organs that most clearly reflect stress or calm. The fit is not casual anymore. It is tight enough to be uncomfortable. Tight enough that you begin to wonder whether generations were taught to look past the very thing the language was trying to preserve. And that makes Genesis feel less like a tale of ancient loss and more like a diagnosis of ordinary human life. To be barred from the tree, in this reading, is to live cut off from regulating contact with your own inner structure, to have the senses always outward, to have thought running hot, to feel the body as a collection of alarms instead of a coordinated whole. You still possess the form, you just do not dwell near it. The river still flows, the branches still fire, but access, the lived kind, remains partial. This is why the body stays such a stubborn witness. You can argue doctrines for hours, and the neck will still tighten under strain. The breath will still shorten. The chest will still harden before an anxious thought finishes forming. And when that changes, even slightly, the whole reading changes with it. The text begins to land in muscle, pulse, and attention. So the final test cannot be abstract. It has to happen in a chair, in a quiet room, with your eyes closed and your awareness set where the old picture never told you to look, right near the root of that branching form. So here is the experiment in its plainest form. Tonight, or whenever the room goes quiet enough to hear your own breath, sit with your back upright and your chin easy. Let your hands rest where they fall. Close your eyes. Bring your attention to that small hinge where the skull meets the neck, the place above the spine where this whole argument has been quietly pointing. Inhale without strain. Then let the exhale travel a little farther, like warm air fading against a window pane. Stay there for a few minutes longer than feels productive. That part matters. The mind loves spectacle, but this subject does not open that way. First, you may notice nonsense: an itch on the cheek, a swallow, the faint thump in one ear, the refrigerator in the next room, the tiny creak of the chair under your weight. Then something begins to reorganize. The face softens. The throat stops holding itself up. The chest unhooks. The belly loosens last. The surface traffic from the 12 cranial nerves is still present, but it no longer rules the whole field. And in that shift, the old verses change function one last time. Revelation no longer reads like a strange botanical promise. Genesis no longer reads like a locked border from deep time. The arbor vitae, the river beside it, the healing spread of its finer branches, the wandering vagus with its long reach into heart and gut, all of it folds inward into one living possibility. The distance was never measured in miles. It was measured in noise. A page can hold a mystery for centuries because people keep looking through it instead of along it. Then, one evening, the neck unclenches, the jaw lets go, the breath lengthens by half an inch, and a line that once sounded impossible becomes almost embarrassingly plain. The room is the same room. The air still hums through the vent. Somewhere in the house, wood gives off one soft click as it settles. And there, in the dark behind your face, the old symbol is no longer asking to be believed. It is asking to be noticed.